6 years ago I covered Krenko Mob Boss, one of the classic Goblin Commander decks. And since then, we've gotten quite a few new goblins that are pretty strong. Krenko himself getting a reprint in Foundations has also intrigued me to take another look at an updated list. Krenko is a 4-mana 3/3 Goblin Warrior for 2 and 2 red. He has an activated ability to tap to create X/1/1 red Goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins we control. This is an explosive token deck that can gain board advantage fast. Krenko counts every goblin we control, himself included, tokens included. It won't take much to have our board state flooded with goblins, so let's tarry no longer and get on with the goblins. Our first section will go into the specific ways to create goblins. General Crete the Boltbringer has 2 triggered abilities. The first, whenever one or more goblins we control attack, we create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. Whenever another creature we control enters, General Crete deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is both a creature generator and a potential pivot to a win con. We can easily attack and get the 1/1 token, but what really drives this card home is the second ability is an additional Impact Tremors ability, dealing damage to each opponent with each creature that enters. This isn't limited to simply the tokens that General Crete creates, but all creatures that enter under our control. Goblin Rabblemaster is a 3-mana Goblin Warrior with a few abilities. Other goblins we control attack each combat if able. At the beginning of combat on our turn, we create a 1/1 red Goblin creature token with haste. Finally, whenever Goblin Rabblemaster attacks, it gets +1/+0 until the end of turn for each other attacking goblin. We have another value engine here. We are forced into attacking each combat with all of our goblins, but oftentimes we'll be doing that anyway. We have ourselves another token generator, and the Rabblemaster can become huge if we choose to swing in with him. Because of the wording on his first ability, he is exempt from attacking each combat if we so choose, but if he does attack, he'll become quite the threat. Krenko Tin Street Kingpin is another token generator that could realistically serve as our commander. Whenever Krenko Tin Street Kingpin attacks, we put a +1/+1 counter on him and then create a number of 1/1 red goblin creature tokens equal to Krenko's power. This can be huge, as the number of tokens that we create is only determined by what Krenko's power is, not the number of 1/1 counters on him. As we'll get to shortly, we actually have a number of Lord creatures that give power and toughness boosts to all of our goblins, which will come in handy with Krenko. Legion War Boss is a goblin soldier with Mentor, an attack trigger that puts a +1/+1 counter onto a target attacking creature with lesser power. Also, at the beginning of combat on our turn, we create a 1/1 goblin token. That token gains haste until the end of turn and attacks this combat if able. We have another aggressive token generator, and what's funny is that this can actually be used to give the aforementioned Krenko a +1/+1 counter should he have none, to get us an additional goblin token off of that Krenko's ability. Pashalig Mons is our aristocrat goblin, dealing 1 damage to any target whenever it or another goblin we control dies. Finally, we can pay 4 mana and sacrifice a goblin to create 2 1/1 goblin tokens. There are a lot of practical applications to this. Firstly, this does also serve as creature removal, as we can direct that damage to opponent creatures using our goblins as fodder to make more goblins. This will also trigger off of any of our goblins dying for whatever reason. Did they get sacrificed, blocked, yeeted off a cliff? Who cares? We will get into them shortly, but we have a number of cards that deal damage as creatures enter, and what's more, since we already care about having a wide board of goblins, this will simply make that end goal far easier. Siege Gain Lieutenant has Lieutenant. At the beginning of combat on our turn, if we control our commander, we create 2 1/1 goblins, and then those goblins gain haste until the end of turn. Finally, we can pay 2 and sacrifice a goblin to have the lieutenant deal 1 damage to any target. I'm not really here for the activated ability, but getting 2 goblin tokens off of just having Krenko out is great value each turn. Just off of having these 2 in play, at the beginning of combat, the lieutenant will see Krenko and create 2 tokens, and then Krenko can then tap to create at minimum 4 additional goblin tokens. Empty the Warrens is in here as a powerful endgame card. This 4-mana sorcery has Storm, meaning that we'll get a copy of it for each spell that we've cast before it this turn. So we create 2 1/1 goblins. This will give us a great many tokens should we play this later on in the turn. So now that we've established a board state of many goblins, how do we push through? Many goblins are very small, and they won't amount to do much on their own. We've included a package of lords and anthems, each bringing a power and toughness boost to make our creatures larger. Starting off, while not a traditional lord in the sense of buffing our creatures, Bloodmark Mentor gives our red creatures first strike. This can give us some edge over other token decks, as our 1/1 creatures will survive combat with other 1/1 creatures simply because ours have first strike. Dropkick Mentor gives our other goblins +1/+1. We can also pay 1 red to target another goblin we control and give it flying until the end of turn. Should it deal combat damage, we sacrifice it. We don't have much in the way of evasion in this deck, as goblins famously don't fly, naturally at least. Our goblin friend here is able to change that. Goblin Chieftain is able to give our other goblins +1/+1 and haste. This is pretty simple and straightforward, but it's very effective. Goblin King gives our other goblins +1/+1 and Mountain Walk, making them entirely unblockable if the defending player controls any lands that have the mountain land type. We can pair this with something like Blood Moon to make all non-basic lands into mountains, causing them to lose their other abilities and only tap for 1 red mana. Goblin Trashmaster gives our goblins +1/+1 and allows us to sacrifice a goblin to destroy a target artifact. This is our anti-mana rock card, and it is incredibly effective at taking out opponents' soul rings or forcing the use of things like their treasure tokens. Goblin Warchief gives us a 1 mana discount on our goblin spells, and it gives our goblins haste. See, we want to make as many goblins as possible, and we want to turn them sideways. Any means to give us more mana discounts or give our board haste is absolutely worth considering. Hobgoblin Bandit Lord gives our other goblins +1/+1, and we could pay 1 red, tap the Bandit Lord, and have it deal damage equal to the number of goblins that entered under our control this turn to any target. This card does take a little brain power to use, and while I understand that for goblins that may be difficult, I do believe in you. See, if we use this after Krenko's made tokens, we can tap this to do even more damage. I think the best time to use this ability is at the second main phase, after combat-based creature token generation, so we can maximize the payoff. Legion Loyalist has Battalion, where when it and at least 2 other creatures attack, creatures we control gain first strike and trample until the end of turn, and they cannot be blocked by creature tokens this turn. This card is fun. Once our deck begins to go off, the only other kind of deck that can really hold us off is another creature token deck. But if we use the Loyalist to make our tokens unblockable, a lot of our damage will be getting through, especially since we give our creatures first strike and trample. We've already gone over 5 creatures that give +1/+1 boons, and we have several more cards we've yet to discuss that will also power up our goblins. We are a goblin aggro deck, and we will be doing damage. Rundvelt Hordemaster gives our goblins +1/+1, and whenever it or another goblin we control dies, we exile the top card of our library, and if that card is a goblin, we can cast it until the end of our next turn. Timing rules still apply, but we can use some of our sack outlets that cycle us through the goblin tokens and such to get additional card draw out of this. Banner of Kinship is a great way to close out games, especially if we have a decent sized board of goblins in play. We play this and choose goblins, and then it will enter with a fellowship counter on it for each creature we control of that chosen type. Then, creatures we control of that chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter on the banner. Say we have 5 goblins out, not a huge number by any stretch, but enough. This card will enter with 5 fellowship counters on it, and then all of our goblins get +5/+5. This can be an amazing finisher. On the flip side, we have Door of Destinies, a longtime favorite card of mine. As it enters, we choose goblins as our creature type, then, whenever we cast a goblin spell, we put a charge counter on the Door of Destinies. Creatures we control get +1/+1 for each charge counter on the Door of Destinies. This card is very similar to the Banner of Kinship, although it does need build-up rather than providing instant payoff. You'll want to cast this early enough in the game so that you can cast more goblin spells and get more counters onto the door. Vanquisher's Banner offers our goblins +1/+1, and then whenever we cast a goblin spell, we draw a card. This is an excellent engine. It will help us continue the momentum as we cast our goblins and draw more cards. Lastly, Shared Animosity gives our attacking creatures +1/+0 for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. So aside from attacking to win, which can be done very easily given the benefits and boons we give to our goblin goons, how else can we win? To take advantage of the sheer number of creature tokens this deck can generate, we are looking for ETB burn abilities, such as the aforementioned General Create, who pings each opponent for 1 damage whenever another creature we control enters. Agate Instigator uses this ability and brings with it the Offspring mechanic, where for 2 additional mana, we can get a token copy of the Instigator, except that token is a 1/1. That part is irrelevant. I want the token to get the additional instance of dealing 1 damage to the table for each creature that enters. Molten Gatekeeper brings this ability as well as the Unearth mechanic, where if it is in the graveyard, you can pay 1 red to return it from the graveyard to the battlefield. It is exiled at the beginning of the next M step or at the next point where it would leave the battlefield. This has some very relevant recursion on it, meaning that it will be a little bit harder to remove, although its ability is just more redundancy. Perforos, God of the Forge, deals 2 damage to each opponent whenever another creature enters under our control. He is also indestructible, meaning that Perforos will be the hardest to remove for opponents. That spells bad news, as he also carries a repeatable activated ability, giving creatures we control +1/+0 until the end of turn, but that 2 damage per creature will really start shortening the clock on the games. Massive Raid is a 3-mana instant that deals damage to target creature or player equal to the number of creatures you control. If you need a quick way to deal with an opponent, this is a clean solution that could easily take an opponent completely out of the game. Throne of the God Pharaoh burns each of our opponents at our end step based on the number of tapped creatures we control. Finally, we have Impact Tremors, a 2-mana enchantment that pings each opponent for 1 damage for each creature that's entered under our control. This deck is very straightforward and would probably be a great option to introduce someone to the format with. Krenko isn't complicated to understand. You create Goblin tokens and you turn them sideways. Since Krenko generates such heavy foot traffic, we can pair them with ETB burn abilities to lay the hurt on our opponents, even if we're not attacking. There is a lot of variation that you can have with this deck since Goblins are one of the largest families of creatures. You want to play aggressively, hit hard, hit fast. If you lose a few Goblins along the way, they weren't long for this world. If you're looking for the full list, you can follow the link in the description to the Moxfield page. But with that, we will come to the end of our newest look at Krenko. What do you think of this deck? Is this something you'd like to explore as well? Let's talk in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, likes and shares are some of the best ways to help support the channel. If you're new here, remember to be subscribed so you never miss our next video. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll catch you all next time.